I think we do have to protect our energy because that's one of the great strategies of climate deniers is to draw us into these algorithm building, supporting cycles of anger. And I don't think that fighting like that is helpful at all. So you almost have to do some kind of ninja energy moves on these people and find ways to other ways of entry.
Dr. Courtney Howard talks in the film about things like having potlucks or just really knowing who the people are that are living around you and finding ways to get to know each other and living in community. I guess knowing who is the most vulnerable around you, who might need help in case of something that happens, one of the climate disasters. So, I guess just really getting involved and being out there and getting to know people.
If we have the same conversation, but with a politician, with our elected representatives who are actually involved in policymaking and, who can, Connor, you and I work together advocating for the cap on oil and gas emissions. And for me, that conversation is so much more important than arguing with someone who thinks that the Lytton fire was started by space lasers.
It wouldn't be the same film without your poetry, Megan. It really transformed the film. It really made it a film that we love sitting and watching night after night in all these different screenings. It's really close to our heart, and I feel like it's really important for people to help them to process the intensity of the events and the film. Just I think as you talk about how it helped you personally, I think it helps audiences.
Yeah, that's so lovely. For your listeners of the podcast, I'm a survivor of the Lytton fire, and as part of the process, I guess, of grieving or of beginning to recover, I wrote a book of poetry which is called Burning Sage, and it's poems from Burning Sage in my voice, like me reading them, that are woven throughout the film. So because it's my really personal experience, I'm so glad to hear that other people might resonate with it, because it's so personal and vulnerable. But then that the more personal and the more vulnerable we are, the more universal it becomes, I think.
Also, just in the media, very much, this sort of repeated message of, well, climate change isn't such a serious issue, or we should only chat about the economics of renewables and not discuss climate change. Seeing the film was, I mean, even I've fallen into that a bit, right? Like I tend to make a lot of economic arguments these days, but seeing the film, for me, it was going back to and reconnecting with the vital need to discuss people's personal interaction with the impacts of climate change and preparing for those impacts and the importance of the issue from a, you want to call it moral or human level. Welcome to another edition of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. I'm Connor Curtis, Director of Communications at Sierra Club Canada, and today I am talking with Nova, Velcrow, and Meghan about their new film, Emergence, Women in the Storm, which, to quote, goes beyond the headlines to explore how women are navigating climate-based emergencies. But before we begin today, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca with tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes from us. Thank you all so much for joining me. For those tuning in, who are you and what do you do?
Great to be here. I'm Nova Ami, and I'm a documentary filmmaker, co-director of Emergence, Women in the Storm.
And I'm Velcrow Ripper, also a documentary filmmaker, co-director of Emergence, Women in the Storm with Nova.
And I'm Meghan Fandrich, a writer and editor, and my poetry and myself are featured in the film.
So the film explores how women are navigating climate-based emergencies, and you had a previous film, Incandescence, and I'm curious, how did Emergence, Women in the Storm emerge from that film, or what was the process that got you to this point?
Well, interestingly, we worked on both Incandescence and Emergence during the same time period. So over the past 5 years or so, we've kind of been doing the films in tandem with each other, and they informed each other. Incandescence was a very different film, even though the subject matter is related. That was more of an immersive. Film that didn't have talking heads, for example, didn't have music. It was set in the Okanagan and it was all about wildfires.
Mm-hmm.
Emergence deals with wildfires, but it also incorporates stories around flooding, atmospheric river, and extreme heat. And those are all related as well. But we've focused the lens in Emergence on women and their experiences. And we focused on the Fraser Valley, Fraser Canyon area, as well as the Northwest Territories. So they're related films, but we worked on them at the same time.
It was actually really wonderful to be so immersed in this world where both films were informing each other, and we were learning so much from all the incredible people who've been through this challenging time where the climate emergency is really coming home to strike us with such intensity.
And Megan, how did you get involved with the film?
I got an email from Velcrow Nova.
Okay, it was a reaching out thing. Okay.
It was a reaching out, but they had heard of me because of a mutual friend.
Okay, right, yeah. And it's interesting because I know, and this was going to tie in a bit to a question I had, but Megan, you and I know each other as well from a series of gallery, or I should say exhibitions of climate artifacts and impacts. And at one point, I remember you talking about all these details of loss and all these details of the impacts of climate disasters. And I noticed that was woven into the film, and you're right, it had a different feeling to Incandescence, right? Like it was very personal, it was very specific, and not just in terms of like the impacts, but also even when talking about some of the positive things like community coming together. I noticed there was a focus on the film on kind of impacts on sort of like place and specifics and all these little things that sort of give context. I'm curious, how did that come to be a part? How did the poetry come to be a part of the film? And sort of how did those things get woven together? And what was the idea behind that sort of approach to it?
Mm-hmm. Well, we had been editing the film for many months, and we were also gathering material as we were editing. So we were forming I guess, the shape of the film and figuring out what we needed as we were going along. And at a certain point, we had all these stories and we had experts sharing their wisdom, and we felt like there was still something that we really wanted to incorporate in the film. And we paused on our editing process to really just sit with the material and see what more we could find. And that's when we connected with Meghan. And she was really the piece that brought it all together and brought in the emotion and the poetry, literally and figuratively. And so, we connected and did some filming with Meghan and wove it into the film. And it was really what makes it really special, I think. Yeah.
It wouldn't be the same film without your poetry, Megan. It really transformed the film.
Mm-hmm.
It really made it a film that we love sitting and watching night after night in all these different screenings. It's really close to our heart, and I feel like it's really important for people to help them to process the intensity of the events and the film. Just, I think, as you talk about how it helped you personally, I think it helps audiences.
Yeah, that's so lovely. For your listeners of the podcast, I'm a survivor of the Lytton fire, and as part of the process, I guess, of grieving or of beginning to recover, I wrote a book of poetry which is called Burning Sage, and it's poems from Burning Sage in my voice, like me reading them, that are woven throughout the film. So because it's my really personal experience, I'm so glad to hear that that other people might resonate with it, because it's so personal and vulnerable. But then that the more personal and the more vulnerable we are, the more universal it becomes, I think.
I had a question for you, Megan, if that's okay. Just because, we've been showing the film to audiences and you've been present at the screenings, and I'm just wondering, when you talk about how sharing your poetry has been such a healing experience for you, I guess I'm just wondering how it has been to share it and hear from an audience of people who have been watching the film.
It's been a different experience. So I'm used to, like, because my book is out there in the world, I'm used to getting like really like personal little notes from readers. But then, and that's like their personal reaction to my, just to the book. But now, as part of the film, they're reacting to my story woven in among these other stories. So all of a sudden it becomes this really shared experience. So I'm trying to put the words on it. Like, in a way it's not the same. It's a different place in my heart. It's like, it makes me feel so connected with community because of the other people in the film, because of you who have made this beautiful film. And then also because of the audience that's been there and shared that experience. It connects with this real sense of community, rather than this, like, my heart is broken and you see me in the heartbreak. It's like, no, I'm part of something bigger and beyond myself and beyond even, the town of Lytton or us survivors here, although we're also a big part of that. But yeah, it just really connects with that sense of belonging, I think.
I was going to ask about that because during the Newfoundland and Labrador wildfires last year that happened, over quite severe, one of our staff, Cassie Drodge, who lives there, and is our transition coordinator actually for the province, decided to set up a mutual aid network to try and help people with things. And one of the things that, I was sort of assisting from the background with that, but one of the things that came up in the list of things people could offer was basically community related things, right? Like telephone calls to people to check in, the chance to do. And it was interesting that in the film, you're documenting some cases of, again, quotation marks, mutual aid. Not everybody calls it this, right? But it is not just, I think we have this mindset of thinking about that as it's just disaster relief, it's just physical supplies, it's just that kind of side of things. And it's always about just recovery and the negative things, as opposed to like community building, proactive action, and the artistic side. I'm curious, other examples of that you came across in the film. So expand beyond what we normally think of as a response to these impacts, right? Into maybe more the arts or yeah, the psychological and communicative world.
Yeah. Well, one of the stories that we explored is the Flood Stories project, which is really about the power of collective storytelling. And it's Michelle Superle kind of launched this project, and it involved all the members of the community that were invited to create art reflecting their experience with the flooding of the Fraser Valley due to the atmospheric river in 2021, which was right in the same year as the Lytton fire. It was that incredible time of hydroclimate whiplash where, as Megan talks about so beautifully in the film, we went from wildfires and heat domes to flooding and atmospheric rivers. And capturing those stories, bringing those, creating a space for people to tell their stories and come together, became a powerful force of healing. And Michelle's actually, I love that Michelle and you, Megan, have kind of had this connection during the screenings, and we're planning a screening with her in the Fraser Valley that Megan's going to come to as well.
I'm curious to touch on one other thing, because you mention in the film about climate change as a diagnosis, and I found this a really interesting metaphor because it does help kind of explain a few things. And it made me think back to COVID too, and some of the denial we saw around that period, right? But I'm curious to get your thoughts on something because it's one thing to get a bad diagnosis with a few symptoms and say, okay, I want to have a second opinion, right? Like that's very understandable. But it feels now we are somewhat far into the symptoms of climate change. Again, I'd go back to the Newfoundland Labrador wildfires, where I think very much a wake-up call last year for a lot of people, but some are still struggling with that, right? And I know that one of the key things that you mention in the film and that I've seen definitely in the larger comms world is people talking to each other and people having discussions in their communities and inter-community discussions between different people who've been impacted. But what is, I guess, do you have any advice for people who are at that point or are thinking, how do I have those conversations with my neighbors or with other communities, or how do I connect with other people around this?
Well, I guess the first thing is knowing who your neighbors are, and really, literally just, I guess, talking to them and having some ways to connect that are outside of the emergency planning realm, and then kind of introducing that into the conversation. Dr. Courtney Howard talks in the film about things like having potlucks or just really knowing who the people are that are living around you and finding ways to get to know each other and living in community. I guess knowing who is the most vulnerable around you, who might need help in case of something that happens, one of the climate disasters. So I guess just really getting involved and being out there and getting to know people.
I also think that, in with climate denial, there is a kind of a fundamentalism almost in with some people, where it's an ingrained fundamentalism that is like almost like a religious belief in climate denial. And at that point, I think you need to, in some conversations, you just need to conserve your energy and not, it's like, am I going to really get this person to change their faith? No. What can we meet on? And maybe you can't go there, but maybe you can talk about emergency preparedness because the emergencies are coming, or maybe you can find another way to relate. So, as a world traveler, sometimes find myself in these contexts when like where I have very little in common. I'm trying to find that little space of common ground and work from there, because we can also get drawn in, especially online, where half the time we're dealing with bots, and that can suck our energy. So I think we do have to protect our energy because that's one of the great strategies of climate deniers is to draw us into these algorithm building, supporting cycles of anger, and I don't think that fighting like that is helpful at all. So you almost have to do some kind of ninja energy moves on these people and find ways to other ways of entry. We get them in Q&A sometimes. I mean, like the weather's always changing or the climate's always
Right.
changing. Get these, and yeah, it's
For the sake of that, I'm going to put some links in the description to different fact sheets just for people in case they want. Sorry, Megan, I see you had a comment on that note.
Yeah, I was just thinking about whether we need to change those people's minds, even. Like, the Lytton fire happened because of climate change. It was, 49.6 degrees the day before the fire. But regardless of the reason, town still burnt to the ground. And when you're in that place, like even still now, almost 5 years later, when we're still in the place of rebuilding, the actual reason is so much less important than the events that happened. And so when you're, in your neighborhood and having a discussion with someone whether climate change exists or not, or is it, is real or not, even if they believe that it was, what difference are their individual actions going to make? Whereas if we have the same conversation, but with a politician, with our elected representatives who are actually involved in policy making, and who can, Connor, you and I work together advocating for the cap on oil and gas emissions, and for me, that conversation is so much more important than arguing with someone who thinks that the Lytton fire was started by space lasers. So, yeah, I think it's like a matter of where you put your energy. And like Velcrow said, it's like you're not going to change someone's fundamental belief. And that maybe goes back to the idea of the climate change diagnosis. If someone believes that cancer doesn't actually exist, you will never get them to accept the fact that they are dying of cancer. And so maybe you just focus on treatment or on, on caring for them the best you can.
No, it matches a lot of what I hear from polling, a lot of what I hear from other comms people who are facing the same thing, which is consistently the problem with getting governments to act on climate change is not that like the majority of people or even a significant minority of people are actual climate deniers. I mean, the actual polling is pretty consistent on when it comes to this. The number of people who don't really want climate action, whether they believe in climate change or not, tends to max out at about 30% of the population, maximum, right? When 70% wants some scale of action, and a majority tend to want actually quite strong action. Like there's a poll we actually just put out that shows 58% of people say transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables is more important than ever as of February 2026. 58% of Canadians, right? And only 11% said it's less important. Only 11% of the population, right? So majority is for it. There's a bit of undecided, and 11% is against it. But you wouldn't think that at all from the political conversations that we see. And it's actually more a matter of when we're talking to other people, how do we get that chunk of people who are not as informed or on the fence, or they agree with climate action, but they don't know how to go about like trying to advocate for it? How do you get them acting and talking to politicians and talking to each other and realizing they're not alone? Then it is, as you say, I'm going to have a fight with a climate denier for 5 hours and feel burnt out afterwards. And, as you're saying, the ninja move, right? How do you conserve your energy so that you're talking to the right people? Maybe not the people who totally agree with you already on everything either, because that can be a bit of a circular conversation. We have that problem too. But how do you get to those people who really are in the center or really are on the fence about the issue? Or to your political leaders and get them engaged.
It's great to hear those figures because you just kind of assume that it's higher, the number of people who are actually climate deniers, but they're just louder.
Or maybe you get inundated with those bots.
That too. It's a real.
Yeah.
We just had there was a youth group at a school, high school, that did a fundraiser for us last year, and one of our fundraising person just did a podcast with them, and they were talking about how online now they were talking about more in the sense of commercial products, right? But they were saying the amount of like bot reactions and like there's lots of likes on this product post, but you don't know where it comes from and how misleading that is to like your own priorities, what you want, what you think is reliable. I mean, there's more polling. There's like another poll Abacus data did showed like they compared how many people in Canada want to be an oil and gas superpower with how many people want to be a more important to be a renewable energy superpower. And it was 70% for renewable energy superpower, and it was only 30% for oil and gas. And the funny part was, even in Alberta, it was 56% for renewable energy. And in Newfoundland and Labrador, it was like 79% for renewable energy. So like it really is misleading, or kind of like I when I see the polling, it's like I feel sane after a long period of time of self-doubt and loneliness, right? Like and that's on me, who should know better, right? Theoretically, right? From the comm stuff, right? I can't imagine the impact it has on somebody who's just experiencing that stuff online and never sees the polling, right?
I was going to jump back to your question about like how do we, meet with the policymakers. For the last year or so, I've been involved with a really great organization called My Climate Plan, and they partnered with New Majority, which works towards getting youth out to vote. And between the two of them, they had the politician outreach program, which was getting youth under 30 to sit down, helping the youth to arrange the meetings. They would have a storytelling session with me to like connect with their own climate story. And then they were having meetings with their MPs or their MLAs. And it was so amazing. Like quite often the youth would hear that this is the first time, that they've had youth come into the office to chat with them. And it was just all climate related conversations. And it was really like a wide range of different youth. Some studying climate related things, some not. Like I talked to a whole engineering program in the Maritimes. Like it was just like super cool. And the outcome of the conversations was really positive. And I think it's like you said, Connor, even though the stats show that, that we want to move forward, right? We want to make these positive changes. Yet what's coming out of, say, Ottawa or the provincial governments isn't aligning with that. But maybe that's just more of us actually just need to send that email and say, can I have a meeting with my MP? It's actually it's a more simple process than a lot of us believe, and so important to raise our voices when I think those MPs are so used to just having, the CEOs in their business suits flying in on their private jets to advocate for, the oil industry, for example, and not having actually their constituents who are there saying like, these are my concerns. So I think actually and this is goes back to my experience with the film as well. And my, the partnering that I've done with Sierra Club, for all of these things, it's just like, as soon as we can raise our voice, already that makes a difference, right? Just to raise it, just to speak a little louder. And that is what will make the difference. So I think the film is amazing because it helps so many of us speak a little louder.
Well, I was also really happy to just see the film coming out at this point because there is so much pressure, it feels like, externally being put upon us to believe that climate change is an irrelevant conversation these days, right? Like that's the political, as you say, the sort of like the corporate bubble around Ottawa a bit, right? But also just in the media, very much, the sort of repeated message of well, climate change isn't such a serious issue, or we should only chat about the economics of renewables and not discuss climate change. And like just seeing the film was, I mean, even I've fallen into that a bit, right? Like I tend to make a lot of economic arguments these days, but seeing the film, for me, it was going back to and reconnecting with the vital need to discuss people's personal interaction with the impacts of climate change and preparing for those impacts and the importance of the issue from a, you want to call it moral or human level of that. I mean, I guess maybe to get to a question without rambling too much more, in the film, you do talk about like how particularly women and marginalized communities are impacted by these impacts, but also seem to be taking the lead in preparing for some of this and in doing it. I'm curious if there's examples that really stand out to you in doing the film and the research, or things that you'd really like to share on that note.
Well, I guess one of the stories we can look at is the Yarrow Food Hub in the Fraser Valley, and Victoria Hewitt really galvanizing her community and also using her skills, what she was good at to really take action and not wait for others to come and help. It's, just really taking charge and offering her space for people to bring donations in for the community, delegating, people based on what their skills are to go and help other people. And as she says, she couldn't do the sandbagging, that kind of physical labor, but her gift is really organizing. So, an example of someone just really like using their gift to be able to take action and help and make a difference.
I mean, I think about Diana Wilson as well, from the Fraser Canyon as an example of somebody who, she moved into the Fraser Canyon the summer of the Lytton fire, into a remote property, and that she was learning to live on, and was hit by the heat dome, the wildfires, and then in the fall she was hit by the atmospheric river that flooded through the land she was on, and challenged her to the utmost. And her response to that um, was not to give up and run away, but was actually to dive in and join in and look for the place where her community needed support. And in her case, there was just not enough firefighters in the local fire hall. So when she moved there, she didn't even know how to drive. In fact, she was somebody who just used public transportation, but she had learned how to drive, and so that she could, partly so she could join the fire department, and became a firefighter, and is now, totally in there. She's on call. She's out there fighting fires all the time, and that's just an example of a kind of transformation arc. And we see a lot of those in the film. The people, almost everyone in the film, goes through this process of some form of transformation and some personal story of transformation as their response to the climate emergencies they're facing. And that, to me, is the ultimate ninja move in a way, right? Is to have these things coming at us and look for ways to transform that. Because they're gonna keep coming at us. So we're gonna need to find all these strategies. And I think that's one of the things the film does, is it sees these amazing women and the way they've managed to deal with it, and more than deal, actually transform their experience. And we're missing out, in the fact that women aren't as involved in policy making, and aren't as involved in, and aren't as heard from in these roles. We're missing out on their wisdom. And the climate emergency is a all hands on deck moment, and we need everybody. It's not about neglecting other stories, like, oh, men were all threatened because this is a film all about women. We actually heard that from a few people in our test screenings. Like, let's not be threatened. Let's celebrate bringing these voices to the table, because we really need them.
Yeah, it's always a bit of funny context for me, because I'm actually, well, until recently, I think I was the only man on national staff at Sierra Club Canada. So I work in kind of an environment that's inverse to a lot of the perhaps more patriarchal and environments that in the corporate sector, and in a lot of and in government. Um, and it does strike me that, and I had a couple of guests on recently who were talking about this too, that, by not including all these diverse voices, you're missing out on so much wisdom, right? You're missing out on so many things that, like, I've learned, right, through the course of my career, thanks to the fact that, I was talking to people, and, people who came with very different perspectives to things to my own, right? Like, I feel that's something where I wonder if this is part of the problem. I saw a LinkedIn post from somebody who used to work in the oil and gas sector at the corporate level, and now works in renewable energy, who was talking about it being a very, first of all, male-dominated, environment, but also very much we all have to agree, and we never say no to anything, or to any proposal. We consider it, but at the same time, we're not going to chat about climate change. The sort of inherent toxicity of that stretching out into the world from that point, and kind of toxifying our entire planet. I don't know, just struck me on that note.
Sounds spot on.
Well, I'm curious, what's next for the film, and also for your book and your work, Meghan, and where can people find out more?
Well, with the film, we're planning a screening in the Fraser Valley right now, and we're inviting people to host their own screenings. They just have to come to our website at emergence.film and talk to us about what they'd like to do. And then it will be streaming on Knowledge Network starting on April 7th, so it'll be available for people to see across the country for free.
And we're hoping to do more screenings across the country, and then bridge out into a more global context with the film. Because while the stories are very personal and place-based, they're very universal. So we're looking forward to planning our global release soon.
Yeah.
And with my little book, Burning Sage, I feel like it just has a life of its own. It's living out there. If your readers or your listeners are interested, like, I have information on my website, which is meghanfandrich.com. I was just awarded a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts to write a new book. So I'm currently procrastinating and not writing a word. But I'm going to write something new. And instead of poetry, it'll be prose this time. But I think, again, something that talks about in the same way that Burning Sage does, but in a different kind of, I don't know, from the perspective of 5 years after the fire instead of 1 year after. I'm still hoping to talk about the way that kind of really broadly trauma affects you in the way that we like process it and experience it and process it in this really like fragmented way, but also the way that community pulls us back together. So I'm hoping to weave stories of community members through it. I don't know. I have big ambitions and very few words on the page.
Wow, that's how all writing projects start, right? Like that's every morning for me is like I should be writing like a lot. Oh, I'm gonna go check out the social media post instead. So no, I sympathize. I will put links to everything in the description too for people who want to find out more. But thank you all so much for joining me, and it was great to chat to you all again.
Such a pleasure, Connor. Thank you.
And do go to the links in the description. There's a link to find out more about Emergence, the film. There's also links to some of the fact sheets that we discussed and to Meghan's website. And before we go today, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions and other actions and events and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM, bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes from us.